Hello, everyone. This is Alan Goter, your host of True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination, and welcome to this episode of Andersonville, Hell on Earth. Now, what I want to do is, since it's around Christmas time, I thought I would bring your attention to, hey, I've written a couple of books. All right, Dark Bayou, Infamous Louisiana Homicides, and Bloodstained Louisiana, 12 murder cases from 1896 to 1934, and what better gift for a true crime enthusiast than two books about true crime. Now, granted, they are about Louisiana. They are in Louisiana history, but they are definitely pretty good. They've gotten pretty decent reviews, and I'm kind of proud of them. Okay. This week's episode, war has always been the scourge of mankind. Young men who sense the duty to defend their ideals or homeland against an invader risk their very lives to achieve that end. But sometimes the journey to glory has many detours. Those that seek the mercy of the enemy and surrender rather than risk massacre hope that they are treated as human beings and with the respect of a fellow warrior. But other times, the lack of reverence from the enemy can be demeaning and deadly. This is a story of one such instance where soldiers fended for themselves and the person in charge appeared to murder without a purpose other than to decrease the population of the prisoner of war camp he commanded.
All quiet along the Potomac tonight, except here and there a stray picket is shot as he walks on his beat to and fro by a rifleman hid in the thicket. 'Tis nothing, a private or two now and then will not count in the news of the battle. Not an officer lost, only one of the men.
The American Civil War took its toll on the nation. By the time the figures were solidified, it had been estimated that over 650,000 Americans died as a result of the war. Some perished in combat, some from disease. But one of the major categories where men died had to do with their treatment as prisoners of war. Many of the camps received a just reputation where men were neglected, went unfed, or suffered at the hands of other soldiers who would bully their comrades in arms for food or possessions within the camp. Sometimes they would bully their fellow soldiers for other things as well. The contributing factors to the fatalities had to do with a lack of food or medical care. The most infamous of all POW camps during this time stood as a monument to the mistreatment of humans. Camp Sumter, known throughout history as Andersonville, became synonymous with hell on earth with regards to the mistreatment of prisoners of war. During the war, prisoner exchanges took place so that soldiers could return home at the relief of their loved ones. The Confederacy decided to end this practice as there also appeared to be an exchange of black prisoners of war. In addition, the established prisoner of war camps bulged with those captured in the various battles occurring repeatedly at that time. Both sides sought a solution as to the overpopulation of these camps. In February of 1864, the Confederacy established a prison located in Macon County in southwest Georgia to provide relief for the large number of Union prisoners concentrated in and around Richmond, Virginia. The new camp was named Camp Sumter, but quickly became known as Andersonville. The site of the new facility stood next to a railroad depot, which would have made it easier for the new arrivals to get to the camp. The problem with the camp's location became the access to supplies. Even though the railroad was situated close by, the Confederacy even had problems feeding their combat soldiers, not to mention feeding enemy soldiers in prisoner of war camps. The reason for building Camp Sumter, as opposed to other locations the Confederacy suggested, was the inland location of the camp, making it impervious to possible Union raider attempts to liberate their soldiers. The inhabitants of the area rarely objected to placing such a camp in that spot. Local black labor, both free and slave, were pressed into service of the Confederacy, and it consisted of a stockade and a trench enclosing more than 16 acres. A small creek called Stockade Branch ran through the middle of the enclosed area. Originally, Camp Sumter was designed to handle no more than 10,000 prisoners. When the prisoner exchanges finally broke down, the population increased exponentially. The numbers within Andersonville reached 30,000. Because of the increase in prisoners within the stockade, those men found it hard to find a space to lay down. Moreover, because the camp was constructed very hastily, there was no time to construct proper barracks for the inmates. Without the benefit of clothing, the men suffered in the hot Georgia summers and the not-so-mild winters. Most of the men later became shoeless, not only because of wear and tear, but inside of the camp, a group of prisoners known as the Raiders terrorized their fellow inmates to the point of extortion and murder. Andersonville held the highest mortality rate of any of the southern POW camps. Of the 45,000 prisoners who went through the camp, 13,000 died while in captivity, mostly from malnutrition. Even the guards at the camp were issued very poor rations. In the summer of 1864, camp administrators, using the labor of Union prisoners and enslaved workers, expanded the camp size from 16 to 26 acres. They constructed a hospital, a bakery, and very few barracks. The stockade walls were extended, yet the continued arrival of prisoners made the efforts at expansion for naught. While in the camp, the prisoners did little to improve their station. When prisoners were allowed to go outside of the camp walls to collect firewood, some seized upon the opportunity to escape. Therefore, these particular details had been severely curtailed. The stream that ran through the camp soon became a swamp where men would not only wash, but use the location as a latrine. This spread numerous diseases and contributed to many of the deaths at the camp. The new commander of the camp, Captain Hartmann Heinrich Henry Wurtz, a Swiss immigrant, took over in March of 1864. Wertz was born in 1822 in Switzerland, and he and his family had emigrated to the United States in 1849. He attempted to go into business as a physician in New York City. Failing at this, he moved to Connecticut and then Northampton, Massachusetts, where he worked as a translator in several small factories. There he took a job working at a water cure establishment before moving to Kentucky to work as a homeopathic physician. He operated water cure establishments in Cadiz and Louisville until 1857, when he moved to Louisiana to take charge of Cabin Steel, a 2,200-acre plantation owned by Levin R. Marshall. At Cabin Steel, Wertz continued to practice homeopathic medicine while overseeing the hundreds of slaves in bondage there. Wertz joined the Confederate Army in Madison, Louisiana, and was wounded in the left arm at one of the early battles of the war. This wound never healed properly and caused Wertz much pain throughout his life. After his arrival, some of the prisoners approached Captain Wertz about the problem with the Raiders, and they were finally brought to accountability, where Wertz allowed the inmates to arrest and try the Raiders responsible for the robberies, extortion, and even murders of their fellow inmates. On July 11, 1864, a group of men calling themselves the Regulators arrested the leaders of the Raiders and executed them. In the cemetery that contains the remains of the men who died at Andersonville, the Raiders are buried separately, denoting a location of dishonor. After the execution of the ringleaders, an inter-camp police force organized that sought to impose discipline, improve sanitary conditions, and curtail the robberies that occurred. In some instances, The new regulators were no better than the raiders, as they continued to take advantage of the new arrivals to the camp. There are some instances when men who were assigned to take care of the sick in the prison hospital stole valuable food and medicines and hoarded them for themselves. To add to the frustration that accumulated amongst the population of the camp was the continuing lack of food and sanitary conditions. Additionally, an imaginary wall known as the deadline was used to keep prisoners within the confines of the stockade. Any prisoner seen as violating the perimeter known as the deadline was shot on sight. Most directed their anger and frustrations at the conditions toward Captain Wurtz. Being a former medical man, one would think that Captain Wertz would try to pay more attention to the conditions and seek ways to improve them. Instead, conditions worsened. With Union General William Tecumseh Sherman's march through the South becoming more intense while moving deeper into Georgia, the threat of attacks on Andersonville led to the transfer of most of the prisoners to other camps. At this time, the camp's population reached 33,000 men. By the time most of the prisoners had been evacuated as a result of Sherman's march to the sea, by November 1864, only 1,500 remained. But in December, more transfers were brought back to the camp, to where the population exceeded 5,000 men. The prison population also took its toll on the manpower to watch over them. During the course of the camp's history, the garrison of Confederates assigned guard duty consisted of various units from the 55th Georgia Infantry, the 26th Alabama, and a battery from Florida. As these troops would be routinely called away for combat duty, then members of the Georgia militia, mostly old men and young boys, would rotate into the prison camp to perform garrison duty. The deadline seemed to hold most of the prisoners at bay. Even though some prisoners saw their way to freedom through firewood retrieval, others looked to various work details to escape from their captors. Tunnels have been discovered over the last few years that point to an active escape mentality. Additionally, because of the lack of drinking water, the prisoners started digging for drinking wells, and some used these wells to disguise the digging of escape tunnels. But unlike other Confederate prisons, Andersonville saw very few successful escapes during the operation of the camp. Most of those who proved successful in their efforts to escape saw assistance from war-weary white Southerners and enslaved blacks. On April 9, 1865, because of a continuing lack of support, ammunition, and food, the Confederacy surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Northerners who believed they suffered a long war brought on by Southern intransigence and unwillingness to compromise, when in fact Lincoln invaded the South with his call for 75,000 troops to end the rebellion. The people of the North were looking for revenge, and Wertz became a likely target. Almost a month after the surrender, Union forces approached Henry Wertz's house and arrested him for war crimes against the Union prisoners at Andersonville. Another officer in command at the camp, James W. Duncan, was also taken into custody for the same charges. Prosecutors hoped to prove that Wertz and Duncan took orders from the Confederate government regarding their treatment of Union troops at the prison camp. Commissioned by the Department of War, a special tribunal was organized to conduct the trial of Captain Henry Wertz on August 23, 1865, in Washington, D.C. The proceedings began with the charges against the accused being read: that he conspired with others to injure the health and destroy the lives of soldiers in the military service of the United States, then held and being prisoners of war within the lines of the so-called Confederate States and in military prisons thereof, to the end that armies of the United States might be weakened and impaired in violation of the customs and laws of war, and Henry Wertz's custody as a prisoner of war whose name is unknown, then and there feloniously, and of his malice aforethought, did shoot and discharge, inflicting upon the body of the soldier aforesaid a mortal wound with the pistol aforesaid, in consequence of which said mortal wound, murderously inflicted by the said Henry Wertz, the said soldier thereafter, to wit, on the 9th day of July, A.D. 1864, died. Wertz's counsel after hearing the charges, withdrew from his defense. Another attorney, observing the proceedings, stepped forward and offered his services to the accused. Wurtz's defense argued that he should be released from this trial as he was a member of the military, and since the war was now over, he should be allowed to return home. The court denied the request. Thus, the defense pled not guilty to the charges presented to the court. The defendant further objected to and denied the jurisdiction of the commission to try him for any offense whatsoever, and denied its jurisdiction to try him on the charges and specifications that were exhibited against him. The prisoner also pled to that this military commission had no jurisdiction over either his person or over the subject matter of the charges and specifications, being a tribunal unauthorized by either statute, military law, martial law, or well-established usage, and that he was a naturalized citizen of the United States, and that he is not, and never had been, in the land or naval forces of the United States, that the United States are now at peace both as to foreign and civil war, and that the lately existing civil war is ended, and that no military jurisdiction or authority incident to a state of war alone can rightfully retain, try, or punish him. The court hoped by cornering Wertz with evidence to his culpability in the massive death toll of the camp, he may turn state's evidence to implicate the leaders of the Confederacy in a conspiracy to murder Union troops in the camps. One Confederate soldier who stood guard at Andersonville stated that he personally witnessed Wurtz's cruelty. Calvin Honeycutt, a witness for the prosecution, testified,
"I know Captain Wertz. I have heard him abuse the prisoners and draw his pistol to shoot them, but I never saw him shoot anyone. I have seen him kick them, in July, I believe, for not standing up in ranks when Captain Wertz was counting them off. The man was sick. He looked like it. I do not know what was the reason he did not stand up, only that he was not trying to escape. I have heard Captain Wertz threaten to shoot prisoners at the time he drew his pistol. It was when they were brought there to be put into the stockade. He was counting them off. And there was one who did not stand up in the ranks. The captain drew his pistol and said that he would shoot him if he did not stand upright. He kicked him a little, not much. The soldier looked sick. I do not know what was the matter with him."
Apart from Wurtz's cruelty, there were acts of kindness, but those were few and far between. One of these acts of kindness came when Captain Wertz sent 5 Union prisoners to Washington, D.C., in order to request that the prisoner exchange program be reinstated. Wertz allowed the prisoners to go to Washington, provided that they return without any trouble. The men, guided by honor and with an ability to escape from the horrendous conditions of the prison camp, returned according to their word. However, the authorities in Washington refused the request, stating that if they released Confederate prisoners, the rebellious government could continue the war without end. During the course of the trial, Captain Wertz's injury continued to aggravate him to the point where the court allowed for a couch to be brought into the courtroom to make the accused a little more comfortable during the proceedings. Wertz just laid there and shook his head as the testimony against him continued. One of the factors brought forth in the trial was that the Union strategy in the waning days of the war was to starve the Confederacy into submission. This meant that the Union armies, as they made their way through the South on a mission of conquest, was to destroy factories, farms, rip up railroads, blockade ports, and blew up bridges in an attempt to prevent the movement of food and medicine to Confederate troops. The South was slowly starving. So in defense of Captain Wertz, which would be very flimsy, the South could not meet the needs of its own fighting troops, much less those needs of the prisoners of war. One of the witnesses brought to testify against Wertz was a mysterious individual named Félix de la Baume, who claimed to be a direct descendant of the Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the Revolutionary War. De la Baume gave a heart-rending story of a first-hand account of a murder committed by Wertz's hand, a starving prisoner that only wanted some food. After his death, it had been proven that de la Baume's testimony was false and had been cooked up by the authorities of the North to seal Wertz's fate. The Judge Advocate General then made a motion to the court to call witnesses such as General Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. The court wanted witnesses such as Lee to to testify in the hopes that they could pin the treatment of the Union prisoners at Andersonville on the Confederate government itself. However, this would have prolonged the proceedings, and the military tribunal believed they had enough evidence to render a verdict as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. After the trial concluded, the court found Captain Heinrich Wertz guilty of the bulk of the charges against him, and the court pronounced the sentence of death. On November 6, 1865, at approximately 10:30 a.m., authorities hanged Captain Henry Wertz at the old Capitol prison next to the Capitol building. Because the hangman did not place the knot of the noose effectively, Wertz's neck did not break at the end of the drop. Over 200 spectators watched as Wertz writhed in pain and strangled to death. After the execution, Wertz was buried next to the Lincoln assassination conspirators and later moved to Mount Olivet Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Henry Wertz was one of 2 men who stood executed as war criminals.
Forgotten, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
The other individual prosecuted with war crimes was Champ Ferguson. He was a notorious Confederate guerrilla during the American Civil War, and he claimed to have killed over 100 Union soldiers and pro-Union civilians. He was arrested, tried, and executed for war crimes by the U.S. government after the war. After the Wurtz Trial in northern circles, the convicted commandant was vilified as a murderer. However, from 1899 to 1916, 16 states erected monuments dedicated to the Camp Sumter's prisoners. In response, the United Daughters of the Confederacy initiated a construction of a monument honoring Henry Wertz in Andersonville, Georgia. Every year, the UDC and SCV hold a memorial service at the monument. Until recently, SCV annually marched to Wertz's memorial in Andersonville along with supporters of a congressional pardon for him. The SCV posthumously awarded Wertz their Confederate Medal of Honor, created in 1977. In 1980, historian Morgan D. Peoples referred to Wertz as a scapegoat. Wertz's conviction remains controversial to this day. Despite the surrounding controversy, the Wurtz Trial was one of the nation's significantly early war crimes tribunals, creating enduring moral and legal notions and established the precedent that certain wartime behavior is unacceptable, regardless if committed under the order of superiors or on one's own. Now, we saw this during World War II when the Nazis were placed on trial at Nuremberg in 1946, where they said, well, we were only following orders. Well, every soldier, and I can attest to this, takes an oath that if you are given an immoral order, it is your duty not to follow it. If Wertz was given these orders to execute or kill as many prisoners as possible, it was immoral to begin with. She shouldn't do that in wartime. I did this it's a little break from the regular episodes that we do, but the next episode, let me see who's here. Yeah, well, good riddance, Champ Ferguson. Yeah, there too. But was he following orders, or was he just that masochistic or sadomasochistic that he would want to kill Union soldiers? We have to remember the times, folks. A lot of people were very. It was a rough period in American history. A lot of Europeans who watch this don't really have an understanding as to what was going on at the time. We're still suffering from it today. As an historian, I find it very despicable of leaders to tear down monuments to heroes, no matter which side they fought on. Just because someone wore the uniform of the losing army doesn't necessarily mean that they don't deserve to be honored. I'll give you an example. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee freed his slaves before the war started, and he was the commander of the Southern Army. I watched in horror as they took down Robert E. Lee's statue. They also took down Pgt Beauregard statue. Pgt Beauregard was a Confederate officer from a parish down here in St. Bernard, and he ran for mayor of New Orleans in 1978 on, get this, an equal rights ticket for blacks. And they still took down his monument, okay? I think if you're going to try and rewrite history, it falls under some sort of political ideology that is very un-American, but that's just my opinion. Let's see. Or statues and monuments of him. As a New Yorker, I don't agree with it. However, monuments to him should stay as a reminder of his cruelty. Exactly. I don't believe he should be hailed as a hero. A lot of people in history shouldn't be hailed as heroes, but we should remember history, shouldn't we? If we forget the past, we're condemned to relive it. And that's one of the things that I teach my students. You know, you can't erase history. As long as there are archives there, as long as there are books still there of people who have written books about not very popular things in history, they're still going to remain there. You can't destroy history. People have to know where they're going. If they want to know where they're going, they have to know where they've been. All right, so history is very important. And, I'm not just saying that as an historian and someone who has, a bachelor's and a master's degree in history. I'm saying that because history is a form of connections. Things throughout history connect to each other. And if we look back at the Civil War, it was a scourge on American society and American history. And Kimberly says, I knew you were going to say Lee. Well, here's the deal. Robert E. Lee was offered command of the Union Army before he was offered command of the Confederate Army. That's how in high esteem he was held. He's one of the greatest tacticians that this country ever produced. And the reason why the war took so long is because both commanders on both sides all went to the same college. They all went to West Point. So they learned the same tactics. So when you do a charge, the reaction to that is to close up your flanks. And they did that, and that's why the war lasted so long. But Robert E. Lee later became a chancellor of Washington University, and they renamed it Washington and Lee University. I often tell my students that, yes, the North won the war, but the South won the peace. Okay? Now, it is a shame that we had a lot of Democrats who were very pro-slavery. A lot of the Democrats during Reconstruction, as I teach it, wanted the South to return to the antebellum racial mores. Unfortunately, it worked for a long time until civil rights. Of course, there was a Civil Rights Act of 1875 that came out. And what the South did was they ignored a lot of the laws that came out, and we had, Jim Crow and things of that nature. It's a bad part of our history that must be remembered. It has to be remembered. Now, as far as Andersonville is concerned, now let me tell you something. They had some northern prisoner of war camps that were not so good as well. Let me move this over here so I can see if y'all are writing anything. They tore down statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. Yes, they did. It's a shame that we have to see things like that because of the simple fact that it has to do with, it's more political than it is historical. I'll have to say that. And I get a little tired of it myself, especially living down here. And I live 7 miles away from New Orleans. What are you going to do? You're going to start tearing down all the historical plantations? You're going to start, where does it end? Where does it end? Now, the prison at Andersonville is no longer there, but they do have where they marked off the stockade perimeter, and they point out certain areas where there were tunnels built for prisoners to escape and wells that were dug. And it's very interesting. One day I'm gonna make it there. There was Libby Prison, and then there were some other prisons up north that really weren't that much better. But you got to remember, we weren't prepared for this war, neither North or South. We were not prepared for it at all. And when you look at, people cry out, oh, it was because of this, oh, it was because of that. There were a lot of issues involved. Slavery was not the main issue, okay? It was not the main issue. And again, we're seeing history repeat itself with whether you're pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination. We're seeing it again with states' rights and mandates and things that go against the Constitution. We're seeing a lot of states file lawsuits because they don't want this mandatory vaccination to go through. It's becoming very highly political, and these issues keep repeating themselves throughout American history, more so in Europe. I find it hard to believe that a lot of this stuff has really kind of gone against in Europe. You know, in Austria and Germany, they're having lockdowns. Well, you know, it's kind of reminds you a little bit of the Nazi ideology. You know, you eliminate people's freedoms and then you tell them what to do. It's one of those things. Now, I didn't present this because of the Civil War. I presented it from a kind of getting off the beaten path of true crime. The next episode we're going to have really has to do with, and it's tentatively titled Bloodsuckers, so you kind of know what it's about. Historical bloodsuckers. And it's going to be around Christmas Day, I believe. It's not going to be live. I'm going to record it all and have it for you. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We are on Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. We also have super chats that you could have donated to it while we were doing that. I don't specifically ask for donations. I would like some, but specifically ask it. We are on 4 years, man. We're going on 4 years on YouTube, and we just now reached, I think it was 5,475 subscribers. I don't have any merch. I used to have some shirts, T-shirts that I did myself, and they came out really nicely. But I appreciate all the subscribers, all the fans. Like I said, I wish we had more of them, but hopefully that'll come with time. But like I said, we've reached over 5,400 subscribers, which is very, very good for us. For us, it's just me, but you know, I enjoy doing this. Wish I could do it full time. Wait, let me see. Could you tell us about your books, Alan? I need to write it down. Okay, I was going to anyway, Kimberly. Okay, this book right here is called Dark Bayou: Infamous Louisiana Homicides. I wrote this with a colleague of mine when I was working at another community college. It has gotten pretty good reviews. Of course, then again, you know, as an author, you're not going to get perfect reviews all the time. So the ones that you do get that are, people just don't like it. It's not for everybody. And you can find them at Amazon. You can find them at Barnes & Noble. I think Walmart sells them too. Books A Million. The other book is Bloodstained Louisiana, 12 Murder Cases, 1896 to 1934. Now, one thing I want to say about Dark Bayou is, if you see this name down at the bottom, his name is Charles C. Fody Jr. He is the former Attorney General for the state of Louisiana. All right, and he wrote a really good foreword for us. In fact, next summer, there's going to be a documentary on one of the cases in here involving a radio announcer that murdered his wife. And I was interviewed a few weeks back for it. It's going to be on the True Crime Network. I'll let everybody know when. And this coming January, Dr. Hippensteel and I are going to be interviewed for a podcast on one of the stories that were in the book. A lot of people don't know these things, but, you know, they say, well, it's mostly from Louisiana. That's true. But a lot of these same fact patterns happen around the country and around the world. All right. So the next book, I signed a contract 3 months ago. It's called Southern Evil, and it encompasses mostly the southern states, but the Axeman of New Orleans is in it. So I had been studying it since 1988, and I decided to write a chapter on it. So I hope I answered your questions there, Kimberly. If there's nothing else, let's see here. Let me see. Drew, I'm going to show you comments. Says I could show it or I can hide it. I'm going to show it because people need to know. You know, the thing is a lot of people keep their mouths shut because they think they're going to offend somebody. And whatever Constitution you read, it does not protect you against being offended. All right? If you understand history in a certain point and the way things happened, okay, nothing can change that. It happened that way. So that's why I do historical type stories on here. Nothing real recent. But after the first of the year, we're probably going to be redoing it a little bit. But I just wanted to let you know I appreciate all my subscribers. Hopefully you'll contribute to us. Excuse me, I shouldn't have eaten before I came on the air, but we're decorating the Christmas tree down there, downstairs. So I want you all to, stay tuned. Another episode is probably going to premiere Christmas Day late, like about 6 o'clock, because I have places to go and I can't really do anything live. I like the live streams. It's a lot less work, but, more mistakes can be made while you're doing it. Do we have any questions on that? Any questions? Hello, P.E.S. How are you? And thank you for that last contribution you had last time we were on. Kimberly, are y'all telling your friends about us or not? Please, be honest. Tell your friends about us. We'd appreciate it. It's grown by leaps and bounds. I've had a fantastic time. I love doing these things. I don't know if you could tell. I'd like to thank Bo Walker. Bo Walker was a friend of mine from high school that became a radio broadcaster. He lent his talents to this. He's lent his talents to a lot of other ones. If you go back and watch the... thank you, P.E.S. Appreciate it. Drew, you didn't offend me. Trust me. You didn't offend me. All right. The one thing that I think is... repeats in history is that now people have no desire to compromise. And that's what happened during the American Civil War, is they lost their ability, lost their desire to compromise. And that's what we come up with. And we're seeing a lot of that today. I'm a firm, strict constructionist of the Constitution. So I'm, with the exception of running into a crowded theater and yelling fire, it's not protected by the First Amendment. But a lot of other things, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and being able to address your grievances through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I teach this. I teach the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence about how it is somewhat of a contradictory document, because you have these, 56 of them signed it. Most of them were slaveholders, and they were talking about, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And it's slightly contradictory. But Drew asked a question here. Well, thank you, Miss Kimberly. I appreciate it. I hope your friends agree with you. Drew says, why did they erect monuments to him? I think it was more of a vindictive thing with the South. There have been, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've written several articles for Civil War Times magazine, and I have been asked to speak in front of the Sons of Confederate Veterans local chapter down here. And they're not white supremacists. They're just guys that their ancestors fought in the war, and a lot of people don't seem to realize that not every person that fought in the Confederate Army was a slaveholder. Only 0.1% were slaveholders. Now, if only 0.1% were slaveholders, and if the Civil War was fought over slavery, what were the other soldiers fighting for? And it happened to be pride. All right, it was state pride. Okay, I think we can narrow that down right there. And I'm not. Look, the victors write the histories. All right, and when we talk about the South being the lost cause, of course, it was somewhat of the lost cause. But at the time, they felt as though they had every right to do what they did because of the simple fact that it was also known as, not only the Civil War, it was known as the War of Northern Aggression and the Second American Revolution, because they felt that the Bill of Rights gave them the rights to do that. All right? And that's, I think, where the misunderstanding comes in most of the time. Let's see. Is it a way to glorify a villain or to remember his cruelty and remind us to never mistreat and kill POWs? It might be double meaning there, Drew. I think it had a lot to do with vindictiveness, more or less. The South was mad because they lost the war, of course. And any chance they had to one up the Union later on after the war, they would. I don't think it's like that. I was told a long time ago by my grandfather that we had a relative that fought on the Confederate side. He was 16 years old, but he was only in one battle and he got sent home after. But I haven't really been able to do any research about it. If you look at the American Civil War and the aftermath and Reconstruction, you'll see how Southerners just abhorred the Union because of the simple fact that they were the losers in the war. But again, when we look at Jim Crow and we look at the ignorance of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which had to do with the abolition of slavery, granting African Americans, freed African Americans, rights of citizenship and their ability to vote, we look at that, and that was their way of getting back at the North. That's why I always inform my students, look, the North may have won the war militarily, but the South won the peace. And it makes a lot of sense. They generally look at it. Of course, if you go into a classroom, and I teach at an historically black college, and if you ask a question, what started the American Civil War, the first thing that they're going to mention is slavery, without knowing about the other issues around it. And you point out to them that it's not necessarily just slavery. It has to do with other issues as well. Let's see. I was a rebel soldier in a past life. Hey, okay. To a medium and found out that I was a rebel soldier, and a good thing about it, I didn't. True, okay. Owned slaves, yes. Our country is falling apart. Well, Brian, one thing you got to remember is that Americans have always been resilient. It doesn't matter what color you are. Doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. Americans are resilient. We always overcome things. I understand that we've been going through a lot presently. I'll be the first one to tell you that I'm not quite sure that I recognize who is leading this country, but I can tell you how they are viewed. You can always tell something about a leader by how he's either respected or reviled by other people. And that's all I'll say about that. Because if my political beliefs are out in front of my students, then I have failed as a teacher. So I don't want to go there. I deal in facts. I don't deal in suppositions. But I can tell you this. I haven't seen a true journalist in a long time as far as the news is concerned. Let's see. Kind of like how the vilified William T. Sherman destroyed the Southern factories, railroads. Yeah, Sherman was... He discovered the secret of warfare, and that's you make war against the civilians. And if you make war against the civilians, you will beat the military. Look what happened in World War I. The civilians were eating horse meat near the end of the war, horse meat, sawdust bread. They were just the rations, because a lot of the food went to the German army first. And they said, well, wait a minute, why are we suffering from this? And John J. Pershing, who was the commander of the American forces, when he learned about the armistice that took place on November 11th, he said, we need to beat the German army militarily, because we're going to have to come back and do this in 25 years. Guess what happened? Okay, so it was the civilians. Also, if you look at World War II, the bombing of Dresden and civilian areas kind of had its effect on the military as well. So let me see if I can look at some other questions. Let's see. Okay, P.E.S. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm just going to call you P.E.S. Okay? Let's see. Drew, I have a friend of mine who's a medium, and I haven't really looked into it as to whether I had a past life or not. I used to joke around with my friends and ask them, hey, do you believe in reincarnation? And they'd go, yeah. And I'd go, welcome back. Okay, you got to think about that joke. And I haven't done that. I don't know if I'm going to ask her, but I do believe that if you look at how a body lasts for just one generation, of course, without being too theologic, I think that the soul does travel in more than one circle. Let me put it that way. Let's see. You want to go for okay? Yes, I do, Brian. I think I answered your question there. But anyway, okay. So, and I want to thank P.E.S. again. Thank you so much, sir. Everybody, go out and look. Enjoy yourself while you can. All right. I think it was Marcus Aurelius said, "Live every day as if it were your last, because one day you might be right." And we've gone to the Walmart down here we did some shopping for Thanksgiving. We had Thanksgiving here, and the shelves were stocked. So I'm not sure what's going on, but New Orleans is a port city. It held a strategic importance through two wars, War of 1812 and the Civil War. And that's why the British wanted to capture it, and that's why the Union eventually did capture it. I'd like to thank you all for being here. I appreciate your attendance. Like I said, I hope you tell your friends about us. We are on Facebook. I have a PayPal account as well. And we've done pretty well after the hurricane. Of course, we went through Hurricane Ida, if you saw some of my earlier posts. And they're still rebuilding because of that, but we didn't get a lot of damage, but we're doing okay. And I will probably see you guys on Christmas Day. It won't be live. It will be a videoed episode like you're normally used to, and then we're going to have some more episodes after the first of the year. So thanks for being here, and hopefully you'll look forward to supporting us as much as you can. And don't forget about the books now. Dark Bayou and Infamous Bloodstained Louisiana. Let me put it there. I also wrote a book called Italian Louisiana. It talks about the Italians here in Louisiana. Also has some mafia things in it, if you want to read about it. The assassination of David Hennessy. And I'm trying to get another book done, researching one right now. So I want everybody to have a pleasant Christmas. Please be safe, and we'll see you next time. Ooh.